In the summer of 1943, the skies over southern Europe held secrets that few would ever know. While the world watched the build-up to the Allied invasion of Sicily, a select group of airmen from the United States 12th Air Force and the Royal Air Force were already in motion, flying missions shrouded in secrecy. These were not the thunderous bombing raids that captured headlines. These were reconnaissance flights over northern Italy, designed to gather intelligence that could tip the balance of a war still raging across the continent. The stakes were immense. One misstep could cost the lives of entire crews, while a single piece of information could save thousands of soldiers on the ground. Operating from makeshift airfields in Tunisia and southern Italy, pilots and navigators meticulously charted German defensive positions, artillery emplacements, and supply routes. The aircraft employed were often modified B-25 Mitchells and Spitfires, stripped of any unnecessary weight to maximize range and altitude. Their missions were performed under strict radio silence, often relying on pre-planned routes over mountains, rivers, and urban areas where German observation was known to be strong. Lieutenant James Jim Hargrove of the 321st Bomb Squadron wrote in his diary on June 15, 1943, "Every flight feels like threading a needle in the dark. One wrong turn, and the sky becomes a tomb." Even within Allied command, these operations were tightly compartmentalized. Briefings were held in hushed rooms, maps were coded, and only those immediately involved were informed of the targets. The objective was not only to collect intelligence but also to test enemy reactions to unseen movements. In one operation over the Po Valley, reconnaissance aircraft photographed railway junctions suspected of transporting German reinforcements. The imagery captured troop movements previously undetected, but the pilots were never sure if their presence had been noticed, adding a layer of psychological tension to every mission. Despite careful planning, the missions carried enormous risk. Anti-aircraft batteries were dense over strategic locations, and Luftwaffe patrols roamed the skies with relentless precision. Airmen reported flak so intense it seemed to shake the very air around them, and sudden cloud cover often obscured visual cues needed for navigation. Yet the crews pressed on. Flight logs recovered decades later describe maneuvers executed to the millimeter, evasive actions taken over Italian towns, and the constant hum of engines that could mean the difference between life and death. One particularly harrowing operation on July 22, 1943, involved a small formation of B-25s flying over the industrial outskirts of Milan. The aircraft encountered heavy anti-aircraft fire, forcing them to drop to treetop level while maintaining formation. Navigator Sergeant Robert Flynn later recalled, "We were ghosts in the sky. Every second felt like eternity, every shadow a possible trap." Remarkably, the formation returned with only minor damage, but their photographs revealed German troop movements that would prove invaluable in the coming Sicilian landings. Yet, for all the precision and bravery, much of what these airmen accomplished was never officially recorded. Reports were classified, files were buried, and entire missions were later removed from standard operational logs. The secrecy has left historians piecing together fragments from diaries, recovered flight manifests, and partisan testimonies. The mystery deepens when one considers how many flights disappeared entirely, planes that vanished into the Italian landscape with no survivors, leaving questions that remain unanswered to this day. As summer faded into the late months of 1943, these covert reconnaissance missions laid the foundation for a new phase of the Italian campaign. Allied commanders relied on the maps, photographs, and intelligence collected, yet the names of many who risked everything remained unknown. For the airmen of the 12th Air Force and RAF, each flight was a test of courage, skill, and the fragile line between life and death. And while some returned to tell their stories, others became shadows in history, their missions buried alongside the secrets they were meant to uncover. The skies over Italy held their secrets close, and for those who flew above them, every mission was a step into uncertainty. What awaited the crews in the coming months, missions even more dangerous, routes more heavily guarded, and losses more profound, remained a story that only time and careful historical investigation could reveal. The curtain of secrecy was only beginning to lift, hinting at revelations that would remain buried for decades, waiting for historians to uncover the truth behind the skies of northern Italy. By September 1943, the Italian campaign had reached a critical juncture. Following the armistice signed by Italy on September 8, German forces quickly moved to occupy key territories, tightening their grip on northern and central Italy. For the U.S. 12th Air Force and the RAF, this shift transformed routine reconnaissance into perilous offensive operations. The once stealthy observation flights became strategic strikes aimed at crippling German supply lines, communications hubs, and railways, the lifelines that allowed the Wehrmacht to sustain its operations across the Italian peninsula. One of the primary objectives during this period was the disruption of railway networks that connected the industrial north to German-occupied territories. Targets included the heavily fortified rail junctions in Lombardy and Emilia-Romagna, where trains carrying troops, ammunition, and essential supplies were known to pass daily. Missions were assigned to seasoned crews from the 97th Bomb Group, operating modified B-17 flying fortresses equipped for low-level, precision attacks. Despite meticulous planning, the missions were fraught with danger. Anti-aircraft artillery lined the valleys and hillsides, while Luftwaffe interceptors, often alerted by reconnaissance or partisan intelligence, patrolled the skies with lethal intent. The human cost was immediate. On September 19, 1943, a formation of 4 B-17s departed from Cerignola airfield, assigned to bomb a rail depot near Parma. The aircraft encountered unexpectedly heavy flak and a squadron of Messerschmitt Bf-109s that had been scrambled from Piacenza. 2 planes were lost almost immediately, plunging into the Apennine foothills with no survivors. Local villagers later reported hearing the distant roar of engines and then silence, leaving historians uncertain about the exact sequence of events. These unexplained disappearances became a recurring pattern, underscoring the dangerous nature of these missions and the opaque record-keeping imposed by wartime secrecy. Survivors recounted the harrowing experience in fragments, often emphasizing the suddenness of the attacks. Lieutenant Colonel Richard Dick Thompson, who piloted one of the returning bombers, wrote in a letter to his wife, "It felt as if the earth itself wanted us gone. One moment we were flying above vineyards and towns, the next tracer fire cut through the sky like lightning." The letter, discovered decades later in a family archive, revealed both the intensity of the combat and the mental toll exacted on air crews performing repeated high-risk sorties. Despite the losses, the impact of these missions was undeniable. Photographs captured during low-level runs showed rail lines reduced to twisted metal, supply depots burning, and German troops scrambling to reroute reinforcements. Intelligence analysts in Allied headquarters pored over these images, calculating the knock-on effects on German mobility and planning subsequent operations accordingly. Yet, the fate of the missing aircraft and their crews remained elusive. No official report listed the final outcomes, leaving the families of airmen in agonizing uncertainty and historians with only fragmented accounts to reconstruct the missions. Partisans in northern Italy added another layer of intrigue. Operating in occupied villages and forests, they occasionally observed or assisted downed airmen, often at great personal risk. Reports mention the sudden appearance of Allied airmen in rural Emilia-Romagna towns after failed strikes, but records of these rescues were sparse, often limited to clandestine notes hidden in partisan communications. The combination of disappearing planes, minimal documentation, and scattered eyewitness accounts cemented a pattern of mystery surrounding these critical operations. By the end of September, the Allies had achieved tactical success in disrupting German supply chains, but at a high human cost. Entire crews had vanished without a trace, and the missions were already being classified as sensitive operations, to be omitted from standard records. Historians today speculate that as many as a dozen B-17s and B-25s were lost in these weeks alone, with only partial evidence to reconstruct their final flights. Each loss represented not just a tactical setback but a deepening of the enigmatic aura surrounding these air missions. The tension of September 1943 set the stage for increasingly daring operations in the months ahead. As Allied commanders plotted deeper strikes into northern Italy, the challenges for pilots would grow, from harsher terrain and tighter defenses to the ever-present threat of vanishing into the mountains. The question of what happened to those missing crews lingered, a silent shadow over each flight plan, waiting to be illuminated by future discoveries and historical research. And so, the saga of the classified air missions continued, balancing on the knife edge between operational success and human loss, leaving behind a record shrouded in both heroism and mystery. October 1943 marked one of the most audacious operations in the secret air campaign over Italy. Intelligence had identified a heavily fortified German armory near Verona, stocked with artillery, ammunition, and armored vehicles destined for the northern front. Allied planners deemed its destruction essential to disrupt German operations and assist the advancing forces in central Italy. The mission was assigned to a small, highly trained squadron from the 321st Bomb Squadron, flying B-25 Mitchell bombers modified for low-level precision strikes, a daring assignment that few air crews could execute successfully. The plan was meticulous. Crews were to navigate over the Venetian plains under cover of early morning fog, approach the target at treetop level to avoid radar detection, drop their ordnance with pinpoint accuracy, and return to base before German fighters could intercept them. Lieutenant James Hargrove, a mission leader, noted in his diary on October 14, "We fly with the knowledge that we may not see Verona again. The sky itself feels alive with eyes, and each shadow could be our end." The tension was palpable, the stakes immense, and the men knew that their success would hinge on both skill and luck. As the mission commenced, the squadron encountered immediate challenges. Thick fog obscured visual references, making the precise navigation essential but extremely difficult. Radio silence prohibited mid-air coordination, forcing pilots to rely solely on pre-planned routes and visual cues. German flak over Verona was heavier than anticipated, with bursts of shrapnel tearing through clouds and shaking the fuselages of the bombers. One B-25 sustained severe damage, its left engine knocked out mid-run. The co-pilot, Second Lieutenant Robert Flynn, recounted later, "The plane shuddered like it had a life of its own, but we pushed forward. Turning back was never an option." In the chaos, 2 bombers disappeared entirely. No distress signals were transmitted, and no eyewitness accounts recorded their fate. Local villagers would later report hearing distant explosions and seeing smoke rising from unexpected locations, hinting that the planes may have veered off course or been brought down by anti-aircraft fire. The surviving aircraft completed the bombing run, setting the armory ablaze, but the loss of the missing bombers added a dark shadow to the operation's tactical success. For decades, historians debated whether these aircraft had crashed in the surrounding hills, been captured, or if the crews had attempted emergency landings behind enemy lines. The strategic significance of the mission cannot be overstated. Intelligence photographs taken by the surviving aircraft showed the destruction of ammunition stores and armored vehicles, delaying German reinforcements to central Italy for weeks. Allied command noted the operation's success in internal reports, though the details of the missing crews were never disclosed. In private letters, pilots expressed relief and sorrow in equal measure, relief that the mission achieved its objectives, sorrow for the comrades who vanished and the families left without closure. Partisan reports added further layers to the story. Accounts from Verona and neighboring villages suggested sightings of downed airmen who had survived the initial impact but disappeared into the surrounding countryside. Whether they were rescued, captured, or perished remains unresolved, but these fragments hint at the human drama intertwined with the tactical operation. The combination of precise military planning, improvisation under fire, and the unknown fate of missing crews exemplifies the high-stakes nature of these classified missions. This mission over Verona demonstrated both the bravery and vulnerability inherent in covert air operations. It highlighted how intelligence, skill, and daring intersected with the chaos of war, producing moments of tactical brilliance shadowed by tragedy. The surviving crews returned with first-hand accounts of near misses, anti-aircraft barrages, and the haunting absence of comrades who never returned to base. Their testimonies would later serve as crucial sources for reconstructing the mission, though the complete truth of what befell the missing planes remains elusive. As October drew to a close, the Verona mission set a precedent for the escalating challenges of air operations over northern Italy. Future missions would push deeper into enemy territory, confronting stronger defenses and harsher terrain, while the question of the missing aircraft loomed large. The story of these flights was a mosaic of bravery, precision, and uncertainty, a testament to the courage of airmen whose deeds were celebrated in secret, and whose disappearances became enduring mysteries. The skies over northern Italy had claimed its victims once more, leaving historians and investigators with fragments of truth, tantalizingly incomplete, and a growing sense that the next phase of these missions would demand even greater courage and resolve. As winter 1943 approached, the Italian campaign had shifted into a new, grueling phase. Allied forces had secured southern Italy, but German troops were entrenched in the north, using the mountainous terrain of the Apennines and the Alps as natural fortifications. For the U.S. 12th Air Force and RAF reconnaissance units, this meant that air missions became exponentially more dangerous. Crews now faced not only anti-aircraft fire and enemy fighters but also treacherous weather, freezing temperatures, and the unpredictable effects of mountain winds that could toss even the most experienced pilots off course. Winter operations targeted supply caches, troop movements, and hidden depots that German forces used to sustain their front lines. Many of these sites were deep in valleys or hidden in forests, making them nearly invisible from standard reconnaissance altitudes. Pilots were ordered to fly low, sometimes below 500 feet, to photograph or strike these positions. Major Edward "Ted" Marshall, commanding a group of reconnaissance B-25s, described a typical sortie in his mission log on December 3, 1943. Flying below the cloud line, hugging the ridge, every shadow becomes a potential threat. Visibility can vanish in a heartbeat, and the ground rises faster than your calculations. Survival depends on precision and trust in your crew. Despite careful planning, several aircraft vanished in the mountainous terrain. In early December, a formation of 3 B-17s on a mission over the Dolomites failed to return. Searches conducted by Allied forces recovered fragments of wreckage scattered across narrow valleys, but the crew members themselves were never found. The harsh winter climate, coupled with the remoteness of the crash sites, made recovery efforts nearly impossible. These losses became part of a growing pattern, reinforcing the notion that the air campaign over Italy was as much about human endurance and resilience as it was about strategic impact. Eyewitness accounts from local villagers occasionally provided glimpses into these tragedies. In the small village of Cortina d'Ampezzo, a resident recounted seeing smoke rising from a valley after hearing a plane spiral downwards, yet no formal records linked the sighting to an official mission. The partisans operating in the area sometimes assisted survivors who had parachuted or crash-landed, often at extreme personal risk. These interactions were rarely documented, adding a further layer of mystery to the air operations and the fate of missing crews. Despite the peril, the intelligence gathered during winter missions proved invaluable. Reconnaissance photos revealed German stockpiles and troop rotations previously undetected, allowing Allied ground forces to anticipate enemy movements during the spring offensive. Officers noted that the low-altitude flights provided unprecedented detail, capturing fortified positions, hidden roads, and the logistical flow of German forces. These successes, however, came at a steep cost. Each sortie into the mountains was a gamble against the elements as much as against enemy fire, and the question of whether a plane would return safely lingered over every mission. The psychological toll on aircrews was profound. Letters and diaries recovered from this period reveal a mixture of determination, fear, and resignation. Flight engineer Corporal Henry Lawson wrote in late December, "Every mountain pass is a roll of the dice. You pray for clear skies, for the wind to be merciful, for nothing to fail on your aircraft. Yet the knowledge that our mission may save countless lives keeps us climbing into the clouds time and again." These reflections underscore the courage required to face not only a determined enemy but also the unforgiving natural environment. By the end of winter, the air campaign had created a complex web of successes and mysteries. Entire crews had vanished, sometimes leaving only scraps of wreckage, mission logs, or partisan reports behind. The combination of human bravery, extreme environmental challenges, and operational secrecy cemented these missions as some of the most dangerous and enigmatic of the Italian campaign. Historians today still rely on fragmented records, diaries, and recovered documents to reconstruct what occurred during these months, acknowledging that much of the story may never be fully known. As spring approached, the stakes for Allied air operations were set to rise even higher. With German defenses adapting and intelligence revealing critical targets further north, pilots would be asked to confront increasingly perilous missions. The winter's losses were a grim reminder that in the skies over Italy, danger was omnipresent, and survival was never guaranteed. The mysteries of the vanished aircraft, the bravery of their crews, and the intelligence gained under these extreme conditions would continue to shape the narrative of the classified air missions, a story of courage, loss, and the relentless pursuit of information in the midst of war. By mid-1944, the secret air missions over Italy had entered a critical phase, one that would shape the broader trajectory of the Allied campaign. With German forces entrenched in fortified positions along the Gothic Line, the pressure on Allied command to disrupt supply routes, communication networks, and troop movements intensified. The U.S. 12th Air Force, alongside select RAF squadrons, was tasked with increasingly daring operations, low-level strikes over heavily defended terrain, precision reconnaissance in dense urban centers, and the elimination of critical infrastructure that could alter the pace of the war in northern Italy. The missions were fraught with peril, and the human cost was already staggering. On June 12, 1944, a formation of B-25 Mitchells took off from Foggia airfield to target a German ammunition depot near Bologna. Anti-aircraft batteries were positioned along every approach route, while German fighters patrolled the skies with lethal efficiency. Lieutenant Colonel Richard Thompson later described the sortie in a personal journal. "Every mile felt measured against death. The sky was a battlefield before we even dropped our bombs, and the ground beneath seemed to wait, silent and unyielding." Despite their training and meticulous planning, several aircraft did not return, vanishing over the Apennines with no immediate trace. The strategic successes of these missions were remarkable. Reconnaissance photographs revealed the locations of hidden fuel depots, troop concentrations, and fortified positions previously unknown to Allied intelligence. Bombing runs destroyed rail bridges and disrupted critical supply lines, slowing German troop movements and buying valuable time for advancing ground forces. Yet, the full scope of these operations remained obscured by deliberate wartime secrecy. Many mission reports were classified, misfiled, or buried to protect operational methods, leaving future historians with only partial records of what had truly occurred. Survivor accounts provide fragmented but compelling glimpses into the extraordinary bravery of the airmen. Flight engineer Corporal Henry Lawson recalled a mission over Medina in July 1944. "Our plane took a direct hit on the port wing. Flames shot past my window and I prayed we'd make it back. Somehow we limped home, but 3 of our comrades never did." These letters and diary entries, often hidden in private archives, paint a vivid portrait of the dangers faced daily by crews tasked with missions so perilous that official acknowledgement was scant. The mystery surrounding missing aircraft grew with each operation. Some planes were discovered months later, wrecked in remote mountain valleys, their crews long gone. In other cases, only scattered debris or hastily buried equipment was recovered. Local partisans occasionally aided downed airmen, moving them from German patrol zones to safer areas, yet few official records exist to confirm these rescues. The uncertainty left families of missing airmen with unanswered questions for decades and contributed to the enduring enigma of these classified air missions. Despite these challenges, the lessons from mid-1944 operations were invaluable. Allied commanders refined tactics, improved navigation strategies, and increasingly relied on local intelligence to mitigate risks. The use of low-level photographic reconnaissance and coordinated bombing runs disrupted German logistics at a scale that would have been impossible with ground forces alone. Yet, the human cost remained profound, and the full truth of how many airmen were lost, how many missions succeeded, and how many remained hidden in bureaucratic archives was obscured intentionally by wartime protocol. By late summer, as Allied forces pushed closer to the Po Valley, the combination of daring air operations and ground offensives began to pay tangible dividends. Rail networks were disrupted, fortifications were weakened, and German defensive flexibility was reduced. Yet, the shadow of secrecy lingered. Many of the heroic deeds of these airmen were never publicly acknowledged, their missions catalogued in classified files that would remain unopened for decades. The narratives of missing crews, near-impossible escapes, and precision strikes contributed to an intricate tapestry of bravery and mystery that historians would only begin to piece together years later. The mid-1944 missions underscore the tension between operational necessity and human vulnerability. Airmen faced near-suicidal odds with every sortie, yet their work altered the course of the Italian campaign in ways that official histories have only partially recognized. As Allied planners prepared for even more ambitious missions into late 1944, the courage, sacrifices, and unresolved disappearances of these airmen remained a haunting reminder of the risks inherent in war, and of the stories that would remain buried until the painstaking work of historians could illuminate the hidden chapter of Italy's skies during World War II. The story of the classified air missions over Italy reaches its culmination in the final months of 1944, yet it remains shrouded in mystery and heroism. By this point, Allied forces had pushed further into northern Italy, but German resistance remained stubborn, fortified by natural terrain and determined troops. Air operations continued to play a critical role, with reconnaissance and precision strikes targeting remaining supply depots, communication hubs, and critical railway junctions. The U.S. 12th Air Force and RAF crews faced missions that were simultaneously strategic and extraordinarily perilous, often flying deeper into enemy territory with fewer resources and increasing risk. One of the most ambitious operations occurred in November 1944, aimed at severing German supply lines across the Po Valley. B-17 and B-25 formations flew in coordinated waves to destroy rail bridges and disrupt armored vehicle movements. The attacks were precise but costly. Several aircraft failed to return, leaving the fate of entire crews unresolved. Flight logs recovered decades later indicate that some planes were forced into emergency landings behind enemy lines, while others may have succumbed to heavy anti-aircraft fire or treacherous winter conditions. Even today, historians debate the exact number of missing aircraft, illustrating the enduring mystery that surrounds these operations. The human dimension of these missions was both harrowing and inspiring. Letters, diaries, and interviews reveal airmen confronting fear, exhaustion, and the constant threat of death. Lieutenant William Carver, reflecting on a sortie near Mantua, wrote, "Flying through a storm of tracer fire and flak, the ground a blur below, I realized courage is measured not in triumph but in survival, and in the hope that our actions serve something greater. Such accounts provide a glimpse into the psychological toll of repeated high-risk missions, where the line between heroism and tragedy was razor-thin. Despite the danger, the impact of these operations on the broader Italian campaign was significant. Allied planners leveraged the intelligence gathered from these air missions to anticipate German troop movements, disrupt supply chains, and coordinate ground offensives with unprecedented accuracy. Bombing raids destroyed rail lines and supply depots, slowing German reinforcements and giving advancing Allied troops critical strategic advantages. Yet, the secrecy surrounding these missions meant that many of the airmen who risked and often lost their lives were not publicly recognized until decades later, when classified files were finally declassified and historians began piecing together the fragmented records. The mystery surrounding the missing crews has fueled speculation and research for decades. Some planes were discovered years later in remote valleys, partially intact, yet their crews remained unaccounted for. In other cases, local partisan reports hint at survivors being sheltered briefly before disappearing into the countryside. These stories, though incomplete, underscore the perilous nature of the missions and the bravery of those who undertook them. They also illustrate the layered complexity of wartime operations, a combination of strategy, courage, chance, and secrecy that defines the very essence of classified missions. The final months of the air campaign over Italy remind us that war is not only measured in victories on maps or numbers of destroyed vehicles but also in the personal sacrifices of those who operate in silence. The legacy of these missions is a mosaic of heroism, tragedy, and unresolved questions, a testament to the courage of airmen who faced near-impossible odds. As historians uncover more documents and testimonies, the full scope of these operations comes into clearer view, yet many mysteries remain. The vanished crews, the classified missions, and the intelligence gathered under perilous conditions continue to captivate scholars and enthusiasts alike. In the end, the story of the 5 World War II classified air missions over Italy is a reflection on both the audacity and the vulnerability of those who served above the clouds. It is a narrative of courage measured against the unknown, of sacrifice hidden in secrecy, and of the relentless pursuit of strategic advantage in the harshest of conditions. Even decades later, these missions leave behind an indelible imprint on history, a reminder that for every documented battle, countless acts of bravery remain buried, waiting for time and research to reveal their full story. The skies over Italy, once the stage for perilous missions and vanished crews, remain a silent monument to courage, secrecy, and the enduring mysteries of World War II.